Revenge rarely comes in open conflict. It hides in small traps that twist normal routines into deadly setups. These are 6 of the most horrifying revenge deaths ever recorded, each carried out with precision, leaving investigators to untangle accidents that were never accidents at all. It was March 3rd, 2016, in Helsinki, Finland, and the winter evening was quiet. The streets were damp from melting snow, and neon signs reflected off the wet pavement. In the Kallio district, a small fitness center was closing for the night. Jukka Lehtinen, a 52-year-old gym owner known for strict discipline, had spent decades in the fitness business. He was tough on his staff and often called out their mistakes in front of members. His style was old school and unforgiving. A few weeks earlier, he had a heated clash with one of his trainers, Kari Niemi. During a busy session, Jukka accused him of being careless with equipment and unprofessional with clients. He raised his voice and pointed his finger while members watched from nearby machines. The confrontation embarrassed Kari in front of everyone. His face flushed red as he tore off his staff shirt and walked out. He left the gym that day and told others he would never forgive Jukka for what had happened. Jukka followed the same routine every night, and Kari knew it well. After the last members left, Jukka always ended his shift with a solo sauna session. Same pattern, same time, like clockwork. Kari still had a spare key that he never returned. One evening, he slipped inside after hours. The gym was empty and silent. He moved to the sauna's control box and disabled the automatic shutoff that kept the heat from climbing too high. Then he wedged the outside latch with a metal shim so the door could not be opened from inside. He tested it once to make sure it held. Satisfied, he left quietly through the back exit. The following night, Jukka followed his routine. Around 10 p.m., he walked through the locker room with a towel over his shoulder and stepped into the sauna. A cleaner sweeping the hall noticed him enter. At first, nothing seemed wrong. 10 minutes later, the cleaner walked past again and paused. Thick steam was rolling under the door. From inside came dull thumps, heavy and uneven. The cleaner thought Jukka was shifting on the bench or tossing water onto the hot rocks, but the sound sharpened, like fists striking wood. He called out but got no response. The cleaner tugged at the handle, but the latch would not move. It felt jammed tight. Worried, he rushed to the supply closet and grabbed a metal bar used for weight racks. His hands shook as he searched through the shelves. By the time he returned with another staff member, the pounding had stopped. Together, they forced the latch open. The door groaned and then swung outward. A wave of heat surged into the hall, thick and choking. Inside, the benches were soaked. Steam clung to every surface, and the air burned to breathe. Jukka was collapsed on the middle bench, motionless. His skin was flushed a deep red, and his towel was darkened at the edges. Later checks showed the sauna had climbed past 220 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond safe limits. The cleaner backed away in shock. The room was so hot that they could not stand inside for more than a few seconds. What was once a place of calm had turned into a furnace. Investigators arrived later that night. They found the safety timer had been tampered with, and the latch jammed from the outside. It was not a simple malfunction. Someone had prepared the trap. Tool marks on the control box matched wrenches missing from the locker Kari Niemi once used, and his spare key was recovered during a search of his apartment. He was arrested within days, and the case was ruled a calculated act of revenge. The gym closed for a week. Members spoke in hushed voices about the owner who lost his life in the very place he trusted most. It was September 12, 2015, in Tuscany, Italy, and the hillsides were quiet as evening settled. The air was heavy with the smell of grapes during harvest season. On the edge of Chianti country, a small vineyard was prepared for another long night of work. Running this estate was Paolo Ricci, a 61-year-old co-owner who had spent his life building the family business. Paolo was known for his sharp business sense and stubborn decisions. He ran the vineyard with an iron grip and rarely backed down from a fight. Earlier that year, he forced his cousin, Marco Ricci, out of the partnership after a bitter dispute over finances. Paolo claimed Marco had been mismanaging funds and making poor choices that hurt the business. Many workers whispered that Marco had taken the loss hard. For decades, he had labored in the same fields alongside Paolo, only to watch his name removed from contracts and his influence stripped away. He rarely spoke to the family after the split, but people noticed him walking the edge of the vineyard rows more than once, watching in silence from a distance. Marco knew the property better than anyone. He also knew the dangers inside the underground wine cellar. The sealed stone room held fermenting barrels that released carbon dioxide, a gas heavier than air. If trapped inside without proper ventilation, the buildup could suffocate a person within minutes. Marco had helped design the cellar years earlier, and he remembered every latch, every vent, and every corner. That knowledge became the center of his plan for revenge. On a late summer evening, Marco returned to the estate under the cover of darkness. The harvest kept everyone distracted in the fields, their voices carrying across the rows. He carried a small tube of industrial glue and slipped into the cellar corridor. The heavy oak door had a simple latch, one that could be sealed quickly by forcing a thin bead of glue directly into the mechanism. He coated it carefully, working slowly to avoid making noise. Then he waited for his chance. That night, Marco approached Paolo with a calm suggestion. The barrels, he said, might be over-fermenting. He urged Paolo to check them before morning or risk losing an entire batch. To a man like Paolo, whose pride rested on the quality of his wine, such a warning could not be ignored. Paolo trusted his own judgment above all and decided to inspect the cellar himself. A field hand later recalled seeing Paolo descend into the cellar around midnight, a lantern in one hand and a clipboard in the other. The worker thought nothing of it until some time passed and faint banging came from behind the door. The sound was weak, as though muffled by thick stone walls. When the worker tried the latch, it refused to turn. It was stuck solid. The worker called for help. Others arrived and tried forcing the door, but the latch would not budge. The banging grew less frequent, then stopped. No one knew how long Paolo had struggled inside, surrounded by the invisible gas rising from the barrels. The lantern's glow faded until the cellar returned to silence. By dawn, worried workers gathered in the corridor. They pried at the latch with iron bars until the door splintered open. A rush of stale air spilled out. Inside, Paolo was slumped against the largest barrel, his lantern cold beside him. The air smelled strongly of fermenting grapes, sharp and suffocating. His face was drained of color, his body still. Investigators found the latch had been glued to the mechanism. Traces of the same industrial adhesive were traced to a tube Marco purchased in Siena weeks earlier, and a partial fingerprint in the dried glue matched his record. Confronted with the evidence, Marco admitted he had prepared the trap. He was arrested, and the case was ruled an act of revenge carried out with knowledge only a vintner could possess. The vineyard never stopped. Harvest continued that same week, though workers moved through the rows in silence. For them, the vines were no longer just a source of wine, but a reminder of how one family feud had ended in calculated death. It was July 18th, 2018, in Singapore, and the night air was warm and heavy. Rain from earlier in the evening still clung to the streets, and the glow from streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. At the edge of the central district, the main city library was winding down for the day. Running this busy facility was Daniel Wong, a 44-year-old head librarian known for being methodical, keeping the building's operations running with strict routines and careful oversight. Earlier that year, safety checks revealed repeated problems with the elevators and other systems. The library's maintenance supervisor, Lee Han, had been warned several times to keep up with inspections, but failed to file reports on time. After several missed deadlines, Daniel dismissed him from his position. Lee left the job quietly, but he carried years of technical knowledge of the building and a growing resentment toward the man who had forced him out. Lee knew the library building better than anyone. For years, he had handled its mechanical systems, including the service elevators used by staff to move supplies between floors. He knew every override panel, every interlock, and every shut-off switch hidden in the service corridors. He understood how the safety systems worked and how they could be disabled. Losing his job did not take away that knowledge, and it was that knowledge he would later use for revenge. On a quiet evening, weeks later, Lee entered the library's service area after hours. Using an old access code he had never returned, he bypassed the electronic lock and slipped into the narrow corridor behind the staff elevators. The hallway was dim and silent, lit only by a single emergency light. There, he disabled the safety interlock that prevented elevators from moving when maintenance was underway. He also bypassed the kill switch designed to keep the cab stationary when someone was on top of it. He worked carefully, making sure each wire was disconnected in a way that would not trigger an alarm. The trap was set. He left the building the same way he came in, unnoticed. The next morning, Lee phoned the library's service desk from a prepaid mobile phone. He reported that one of the staff lifts was jammed between floors and acting strangely. Daniel, known for being hands-on and unwilling to wait for outside help, decided to inspect it himself before calling for professional repair. He grabbed a flashlight from his office and headed toward the dim corridor leading to the service shaft. A junior staffer later recalled seeing Daniel step into the narrow passage, his flashlight beam cutting across the concrete walls. The staffer heard him muttering about checking the car roof for a mechanical fault. He said something about it probably being a loose cable or misaligned sensor. Moments later, the service elevator groaned and began to rise, even though no call button had been pressed. The movement was slow at first, then faster. A sudden shout echoed inside the shaft. The staffer froze in place, unsure of what was happening. Then came a metallic clatter, the sound of Daniel's flashlight striking the concrete floor below. By the time the worker reached the doorway and looked inside, the sounds had already gone silent. The elevator had stopped moving. When others arrived and the power was cut to the system, the elevator was found pressed tight against the top of the shaft. Daniel had climbed onto the cab roof to inspect the mechanism and was pinned in the narrow ceiling space above, his body wedged between steel and concrete. There had been less than a foot of clearance. The damage was instant and fatal. Investigators discovered the interlock had been manually bypassed and the kill switch disabled. Security footage showed a man entering the service corridor the night before using an old access code. His build and gait matched Lee Han, the former supervisor. In his apartment, police later found tools coated with grease from the library's elevator system and printouts of the building's mechanical diagrams. He was arrested within a week, and the case was ruled a premeditated act of revenge carried out with technical precision. It was May 30th, 2015, in Key Largo, Florida, and the morning was clear and calm. The water was flat inside the reef line, and charter boats idled along the channel. On a small dive boat tied off near a coral wall, students listened to a short briefing before their first descent. Leading the group was Mark Grant, a 32-year-old scuba instructor at a small neighborhood dive club. Mark worked year-round teaching entry-level classes. In the weeks before the dive, rumors spread that he had started seeing the girlfriend of one of the club's advanced divers. The rival was older, bitter, and had keys to the gear shed from past volunteer work. He knew the equipment well, where the compressors were and which tanks Mark used. Mark's cylinders were easy to spot with his initials stenciled near the boot. Late one night, the rival unlocked the storage cage and rolled Mark's favorite tank to the bench near the compressor room. He cracked the valve to bleed it down to zero, then clipped a whip from a tall supply bottle and refilled the cylinder with pure nitrogen. He set the pressure to normal, about 3,000 psi, so the gauge would look right in the morning. He wiped the tank with a rag, returned it to the rack, and locked the cage behind him. The swap took only minutes. There was no analyzer on the club table because the class was using standard air, not nitrox. No one would think to test it. The next day, the group prepared for a training dive to 40 feet along a coral wall. Mark checked his gear on the boat deck. He opened his valve, checked his pressure, and took a few breaths from the regulator. Everything seemed normal. Nitrogen feels no different until you're under pressure. The hiss was clean, the gauge read full. The group descended in pairs. An eyewitness student said Mark led at the front, a few yards above the sand. 5 minutes into the dive, his movements changed. He reached for the line but missed. His kicks became erratic. His eyes appeared glassy behind the mask, and his movements lost coordination. He fumbled with his regulator, and it slipped from his mouth. Bubbles frosted his mask as it flooded. A diver next to him tried to donate air with an octopus regulator, but Mark did not bite down. His hands were slow and uncoordinated, moving as though he could not understand what was happening. In seconds, he went limp. The assistant diver grabbed his harness and began a controlled ascent, kicking hard toward the surface. But the class had spread out along the reef. 2 more students surfaced early in a panic, waving at the boat and shouting for help. The captain threw a tagline and radioed for emergency help. When the crew rolled Mark over the transom, he was unresponsive. Another dive boat had sent down a rescue diver to help lift him from the bottom after he began to sink. That diver later said only Mark's gear looked wrong. Everyone else returned, breathing hard but normal. Back at the dock, the club quarantined the equipment. The sheriff's office sealed the cylinder and took it for testing. The gas analysis told the story. The seized tank showed no measurable oxygen, only nitrogen. The other students' cylinders, sampled from the same fill batch, tested as normal compressed air at roughly 21% oxygen. The problem was not the compressor or the boat. It was a single tank. Investigators pulled the shop's entry logs and camera clips from the alley behind the gear shed. The night before the dive, the rival's key fob opened the cage just before 10:45 p.m. A security camera caught his truck backing up to the side door and his silhouette moving across the compressor room window. In his garage, deputies found a valve wrench with fresh tool marks and a partially drained industrial nitrogen bottle used for gas blending. His phone showed a late-night search for an oxygen analyzer, not required for air. Confronted with the test results and the entry logs, he admitted he had swapped a tank to teach him a lesson. He was arrested within days. The case was ruled a premeditated act of revenge carried out with simple knowledge of scuba equipment. The club padlocked its gear shed and posted a sign on the counter: analyzers required for any personal cylinders. Word spread fast along the Florida Keys. Divers talked quietly about how a normal gauge reading and a familiar hiss could still hide an empty breath. It was November 6th, 2015, in London, and the rain had just cleared from the West End streets. Inside the Harrington Playhouse, rehearsals were underway on the dim stage. Among the cast was Simon Gray, a 26-year-old understudy who had recently been promoted to a lead role. Simon had stepped in after the original actor, Edward Price, left in anger. Edward had been vocal about losing the part, arguing with directors and crew before storming out. Though dismissed, he still knew the theater well. Before acting, Edward had worked stagehand jobs where he learned the ropes, pulleys, and counterweight systems that moved curtains and backdrops. That knowledge would later become the means of his revenge. The counterweight system used in the Harrington Playhouse was old but effective. Sandbags balanced the heavy curtains and scenery flats, allowing a single person to raise or lower them. Each weight was stitched in canvas and stacked neatly in the fly loft above the stage. In the dark, they all looked the same. Edward knew he could tamper with one without raising suspicion. On a quiet night before rehearsal, he entered through a side door using the access card he still had. Stagehands often left latches loose, so no one noticed he was inside. He located the set of weights assigned to the main curtain and removed one sandbag. In its place, he hung a look-alike sack filled not with sand, but a solid concrete block weighing nearly 80 pounds. He stitched the canvas tight to hide the shape, brushed dust across the seams, and returned the line to its original position. To the eye, nothing looked unusual. To the hand, the weight felt the same on the rope until it dropped. The following afternoon, the cast gathered for rehearsal. The house lights were dimmed, and only the stage lamps burned. Simon stood at the wing, following cues with the script tucked under one arm. As part of his entrance, he needed to pull the curtain line. Several actors nearby remembered watching him step to the rope, plant his feet, and give it a firm tug. At first, the curtain shifted normally. Then came the sound of a rope hissing through pulleys, followed by a sharp crack overhead. Before anyone could react, the disguised counterweight plunged. It fell straight down the guide track and struck Simon on the top of his head with enough force to collapse him instantly to the stage. His script scattered across the boards as he dropped. One castmate shouted in panic while others froze in silence. A thin cloud of plaster dust drifted from the rafters, stirred loose by the jolt of the falling block. Stagehands who had been adjusting lights rushed forward but stopped short at the sight. The block rolled once before settling, its canvas cover torn to reveal gray concrete beneath. The rehearsal ended in chaos. Someone called for emergency services, while others gathered in small, stunned groups near the footlights. The theater went silent, except for the hum of the old lamps overhead. Investigators later examined the rigging. The weights were cataloged, and only one was abnormal. Tests confirmed the block weighed nearly double the normal counterweight. Security checks revealed Edward's access card had been used at the side door the night before, long after official crew hours. When officers searched his flat, they found stitching tools, leftover canvas, and traces of powdered cement on his workbench. He was arrested within days. The case was ruled a deliberate act of sabotage carried out with knowledge only an insider would possess. It was August 21st, 2017, in Santa Monica, California, and the boardwalk was quiet after midnight. Inside the amusement park, the rides were dark except for scattered service lights. The only machine running was the Thunder Drop roller coaster, a steel track that wound through tunnels and sharp curves. Maintenance crews often sent cars through test runs before opening or after repairs. Running this section was Marcus Allen, a 35-year-old senior ride operator. Marcus had worked the coaster for years and was trusted to oversee safety checks. He also had a reputation among staff for being harsh with junior workers. Several trainees had filed complaints about his bullying but supervisors rarely acted on them. One of those complaints came from Leah Ramos, a seasonal employee who eventually quit. Her concerns went unanswered, but her brother Ethan worked nearby and had access to maintenance diagrams of the coaster. He studied the track, noting where a blind tunnel passed close to a service platform. That section, hidden from the main midway, became central to his plan. On a night when inspections were scheduled, Ethan entered the service area with a length of steel cable. He stretched it across the tunnel opening at neck height, fastening it tightly to anchor points on either side. The dim bulbs inside the tunnel gave little reflection, and from the front seat of a speeding car, the cable would be almost invisible. Once set, he left through a staff exit. The cable remained taut, waiting. Later that night, Marcus prepared for a routine single-car test run. A janitor working nearby saw him unlock the gate, step into the loading bay, and settle into the front seat. With no passengers and no fanfare, the restraints clicked shut. The car rolled forward, gathering speed as it climbed the first hill. The sound of wheels rattled up the incline and disappeared into the structure. Moments later, the janitor paused his sweeping. The usual echoes of the ride, the roar of descent, and the screech of turns were cut short. Instead, there was a sudden silence, broken only by the ocean wind. Minutes passed until the car coasted slowly back into the station. Marcus sat slumped in the seat. His upper body leaned forward, unmoving. Across his neck was a severe laceration, the cut running straight across. The janitor, stunned, later told investigators he noticed a brief glint inside the tunnel before hearing a sharp snap. The cable had broken loose after the strike, one end dangling from the platform rail. The test run was halted immediately. Park security sealed the coaster and kept workers back. Maintenance crews examined the tunnel and found the remnants of the steel line still bolted at one end, the other frayed from force. Investigators traced the tampering to tool marks, matching wrenches found in Ethan Ramos's garage. Records showed he had obtained the blueprints months earlier through a contractor friend. He was arrested within a week. The case was ruled a calculated act of revenge carried out with precision inside the hidden structure of the ride. The Thunder Drop stayed locked behind steel gates. For weeks, locals walked past the coaster in silence, knowing the ride that once brought excitement had become the stage for a killing disguised as a test. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love the one waiting for you on the end screen. Go check it out, and I'll see you there.